Today on Project Command, we're joined by Deputy Chief of Operations Eric Linnenburger from the Westminster Fire Department in Colorado. Eric has more than 25 years in the fire service with Westminster, serving as a firefighter, a paramedic, a lieutenant, a captain, a battalion chief, and now Deputy Chief of Operations. He holds a bachelor's degree in applied science with a business of government specialization. And if you read Fire Rescue 1 or Fire Engineering, you've probably seen his name. Eric writes extensively on leadership, officer development, and operations, including articles like The Messy Middle about the role of the battalion chief, as well as preparing for large first due events and how to structure informal tailboard after action reviews for more impact. Most recently, he wrote a powerful piece on the transition from fireground to front office that digs into the culture shock of moving from line administration from line to administration and the skill sets that we don't always teach future chiefs. He's also the host of Ops Talk, Westminster's operational training podcast that brings real conversations about tactics, specialty teams, and modern challenges to the firehouse table. We're going to talk about his journey from line officer to deputy chief, what he's learned in administration, and why he launched a podcast for his department. And finally, we'll talk about how AI can help us manage the increasingly complex fire service organization. Chief, thank you for being here.
Wow. Thanks for having me. Really love what you're doing here, Peter.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And if you don't mind, I'd like to start off by just kind of introducing you to the audience here. So, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what your journey in the fire service has been like?
Yeah, I think you covered the majority of it with that very, very kind intro. I got into the fire service, as you mentioned, a little over 25 years ago. I started in a volunteer department as an intern for a couple of years before I got my job in Westminster. And got that first job I think I got in when I was about 23 years old. So I was just a baby when I came in, and thought all I wanted to do was ride backwards on that fire truck and do that for a career. And as they do, things kind of started happening, and I developed, I realized I liked different challenges, and I just love all aspects of the fire service, especially on the operations side. I've really stayed on the operations side my whole career. I've worked some projects outside of operations, but my focus has been operations. And so became a paramedic, and then thought that's where I'd stay as a paramedic firefighter. I mean, what better place to make an impact out on the streets than, going between high acuity and low acuity medical calls and also fighting fire. Mm-hmm. And then started to get the bug for leadership, and thought I'd stay a company officer forever because that was the best position in the fire department. Somehow years go by, timing's right. I become a battalion chief and determine that is truly my place, right? Battalion chief was like the sweet spot where you're still working a shift. You're in operations, you're running fires. You've got some influence on the command team. It's a really, really cool place to be. And then basically overnight, we had some unexpected changes in our fire department where leadership changes. And I find myself in an interim deputy chief role. I'm just going to fill the void just temporarily. And here we are a year later in the promoted spot. And so, as often things do happen, you can plan a lot, but you really just have to be ready for what's around the corner. And I've enjoyed all these positions, and sometimes I've had to just get out of my own way to realize that I am capable of these different jobs, and that the challenge is actually really, really healthy for us.
Yeah, man, that's a really cool story. Just a great, I think that's a really great example of how it's the fire department. You just kind of end up, you go, every job you do is the most fun. I can really relate to what you said about the company officer role. That to me was the most fun I've had, especially like, a lieutenant, engine company lieutenant. You got a great group of guys, aggressive, want to fight fire. So yeah, I can see how, you're really enjoying that. You don't want to make the move up, but once you get into the new spot, you realize those leadership jobs are are great for having the sort of high impact that I know that you've had, and certainly we've talked a little bit about. But so thank you for sharing that. And actually, I think that's a pretty good segue. I want to move into this article that you wrote, which I got to tell you, I really, really enjoyed. So this was the Fireground to Front Office, Navigating the Tough Transition for Fire Rescue One. And for everybody listening, I'm going to really strongly recommend that you go read this article, especially if you're thinking about promoting, you've recently promoted, you think maybe it's something that you might have on the horizon. I think that this is probably one of the most all-encompassing, comprehensive rundowns of the challenges that you see moving to administration that I've seen. So could you talk us through a little bit about why did you even want to write that article? What got you thinking about that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I think I wrote it first as a therapy piece for myself because it was such a dramatic move, and not just for me but also for my family. You know, we've been on this shift schedule my whole career. My wife's been along with me the whole way, and we built our life around the shift schedule, whether it was the 24-hour shift or most recently we're on the 48-96, and absolutely love the shift, love the time off, but just love the consistency of it. And the camaraderie, you know, being at that firehouse table, nothing beats it. I knew what I'd be giving up, but I also knew that the time was right and I was probably the right person to do it. And I wasn't just doing it for myself, but I was doing it for the people that I really care about and that I was serving. And so I wrote the article just because I don't think everyone appreciates that, especially those that have come up more in administration or came over to administration a little bit earlier. It really was a dramatic thing, and not all bad. It's been my biggest growth opportunity throughout my whole career. There is no doubt. I've grown more in this last year and in a couple months than many years combined. So I really just wanted to share with people that these jobs are very important as well, and they can be challenging, very challenging, but also very challenging in a good way. And so kind of combine those things, not sugarcoat it. You know, I wanted people to know what it really felt like, because it did. It felt a little bit lonely at first. You know, when you leave that table and the camaraderie, to all of a sudden you're sitting in your office, you know, at the you don't have time to actually break for lunch, so you're eating the lunch that you packed all by yourself, and you know, just completely managed by your calendar.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know how to operate an Outlook calendar before. Now it's so funny because I'll even get a little frustrated with people when they're like, "Hey, can you meet me at this time on this day?" And I'm like, "Well, check my calendar.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just block it out. Send me a calendar invite." And I'm already trying not to forget how that actually was in operations. You don't care about those sorts of things. And so just a big culture change. And I think there were some things that hit me really, really hard and fast. And some of those are, you know, like I talk about in the article, just how fast some of these things come at you and the level of intensity they come with, because when we're on the line, we're so used to, and it's what we're trained for. And it's what's so beautiful about what we do and the service we provide, but we're trained to operate in the 911 environment.
Totally.
When you're in that, when you move from tactical to strategic, things change. And there are times you have to have an amazing amount of discernment to know when things need to move fast. However, the majority of the time up there, things need to slow down a little bit, which then frustrates some of the line staff, which I was one of those that got frustrated sometimes because it appeared that things were moving slow. But you just hear things coming at you with that same level of intensity that they did when you were out on the fire ground. And I think that was one of the biggest things was being able to discern the noise.
Yeah. I mean, very, very well said. One of the things that I was thinking about as I was reading through your article, I read it again before this interview, and I just wanted to make sure it was fresh in my mind. And one of the things that it got me thinking about was, you know, if you think about the people that are getting promoted and the people that are moving into administration, and I'm thinking about one person in particular that I worked with recently, and these are people that were extremely proficient in operations. Typically, you know, these are people that you could rely on the fire ground. When they show up, you're like, oh man, this crew's here, thank goodness. And so they go from that environment where they're very proficient, they feel confident in their job, they know exactly what's expected of them, they know what good looks like, they know what bad looks like, and then they move into an environment where they all of a sudden don't feel very proficient, they don't know how to use Outlook, they don't know how to use Excel, they don't know how to use Teams, they don't know how to do project management. And I think the other thing, that as I think back on this, that's a really hard adjustment to go from feeling so confident in your job that you've been doing for 10, 15, 20 years. Now all of a sudden you feel, like a fish out of water.
No doubt. I've had imposter syndrome in every position I've gone in. I mean, that's some of that is healthy, right? We shouldn't know everything when we move into it, but the level of imposter syndrome I had when I walked into this role, and I'm all of a sudden sitting in this office, and people are coming to me with questions, and they want direction. It changed. It was very impactful, and you think about the Peter principle. Nobody wants to to get to that point where they've promoted out of their their level of competence, and so there is a fear there, and I think there's fear anywhere, and maybe it's just the fire service I work in, but there's a little bit of judgment among firefighters as well. Totally. And it's not always a bad thing. We hold each other to a high standard, right? And so in turn, we hold ourselves to a high standard. And so we want to succeed. And it really is, it's learning new skills. It's developing and also, I guess, just being okay knowing that you don't know everything. And I think there was kind of that turning point when I realized, hey, it's not all about me. It's it's knowing who to turn to. It's knowing who your team is, and that's when you get into these more strategic roles is way more important. And so yeah, and that's really why I wrote that article. There were kind of too many lessons to not share what I'd gone through. And I didn't want it to come across as like a woe is me kind of piece. But it was really, really hard. And like I said before, not just hard on me, but hard on our family to adjust. We had a really, really good thing going. And now no regrets at all. Like I found the challenge that I need. And I really appreciate the trust that my organization has had on me, or had in me. Mm-hmm. To go to that role. But that's why I wrote it. I just, I think we're missing, there's kind of a gap in that education and development for going from that tactical level to the strategic level. Coming up through the ranks, we've got a very clear cut process, especially those of us departments that are a little bit more progressive, right? We've got qualification books, task books, that sort of thing for every position, sign-offs that we have to do. We've got state certifications, national certifications. We've got SOGs to follow, or SOPs to follow in most cases. And then, but going from tactical to strategic, there's no way to really try out that job, right? Unless you get deeply involved in some of the things we're going to talk about today, mm-hmm. which is like, the deeper project management type of stuff. I'm part of the executive fire officer program right now at the National Fire Academy. I think that fills that void, but not everybody can go to the National Fire Academy into that executive fire officer program whenever they want to. And so I really think we're missing some of that. And hopefully some of these lessons will start to help us fill some of those voids.
Yeah, I think when I look back on, because this is my second time in administration. I guess the first time was a little bit less of an administration. It was more of, I was first a training instructor, then the lieutenant of our recruit academy. And that's, that's administration, but it's more, I don't know, it's more hands-on administration, I guess, if we can call it that. But anyways, the article rather that you wrote, there's a few things that I wanted to dig into a little bit. And the first one I want to talk about is winning the day to day. And I think that is one of the biggest issues that I ran into, is building a sense of, what does my normal day look like? What does the morning look like? How do I build patterns, repeatable patterns? Because, for me at least, when I'd go to the firehouse, and I think this is true for everybody, when I show up at the firehouse, you know what the morning looks like. You know what your day looks like. You get in there. I mean, you don't know what the calls look like, but you got to check your air pack. You got to get the computer, restart the computer, sign into 7 or 8 different things. make some coffee, check in with the guys. So you have a sense of what your morning looks like, but it's very different when you move to administration and you have to rebuild those patterns and those habits. So talk a little bit about that if you don't mind.
Yeah, I really think you can't get too far ahead of yourself. I think we see that all the time where people come up and they think that I need to think really, really big, and they start thinking way too far ahead of themselves, and then they haven't built the trust and the relationships that they need to, or the systems that they need to in order to be successful. And so you see them and they might look like they're accomplishing things on paper, but they're just in chaos every day when they're in the office or on the job. And so I really felt like it was important to focus on what those systems are, get to know the technical systems, but more importantly was the people and building the team. Really needed to get to know my team, but then also their teams. And I think that's one of the differences too, from going from operations, even in the battalion chief position where, I was in charge of a whole battalion, which was, 40 some people, but we were all kind of moving in the same direction, right? We all had the same goals. We're all responding to 911 calls, doing training, that sort of thing. In this environment, I'm all of a sudden responsible for several different teams, several different sections under my division. And we've all got the same mission, but we have different paths we need and different resources in order to get there. And so trying to get to know all those people, build those relationships, but then also cross-pollinate and get everybody to work together. That doesn't happen overnight, and it's not a perfect science either. And so really just felt like it was important to figure out how people like to communicate, figure out what works. For one of my chief officers, there's a specific time in the morning we always meet because we're the first ones there in the morning. And so we get caught up at that time versus another one where we have other systems and processes in place. And so just figuring out what that is and trying to figure out how to get everybody moving in tandem and supporting one another instead of, kind of jockeying over resources and that sort of thing.
Yeah. And the wins come less frequently in administration. When you're in the field, you get very quick feedback. You go to a fire, you can tell very quickly, did this go well or did it go poorly? And you celebrate the wins regularly. I mean, you go help someone, even if it's just the lift assist, you can see the results of your work very quickly. When you get into administration, that's not the case. And you could, you could have a project that goes on for 6 months and maybe you're not going to get that win for 6 months. And so it's a totally different mindset versus, the field is those very quick feedbacks. You can celebrate the wins regularly with your team versus the administration where much more infrequent and you don't have that team factor. And I think that's something that you've talked a lot about in the different articles that you've written. And then also for the podcast, your focus on the people side of it. But another thing that jumped out at me was the idea of being a generalist. And this is something you talked about in the Fire Rescue One article, was to be a generalist, not a narrow specialist. And we talked before we started recording here about one of my all-time favorite book, and you've also read it, called Range by David Epstein. And this is a book all about how generalists win in a world of specialization. So tell me what you mean when you say be a generalist, not a narrow specialist.
Well, I think it's just it carries on from what we were just talking about. It's knowing where your strengths and weaknesses are within your team, your organization, and knowing who to turn to for things. It all comes down to the basics we've been taught since the beginning of our firefighter training, right? With span of control and that sort of thing. We can't know everything. And I know it's hard because people are coming at us looking for answers. They expect us to know, to really be that specialist in all areas. And it's really, really hard because we're fixers and we want to solve problems.
Yep.
And it's a kind of a hit to our ego when we don't have the answers, right? You kind of envision this leader that's all knowing and people are coming to you and just getting everything they need. And it's just not the case. You're not going to be successful doing it. You're going to burn out and you're not going to give people what they actually need. And that's guidance and support. And we're not going to be mentoring the next generation either. And so I think it's just important for us to really understand, be engaged, so that we know what's going on and what we're responsible for. But we can't be down in the weeds with all the details
Yeah,
of
that's
things. And so really is, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say that's totally true on projects because people come into a project and they feel like they need to be the expert on every element of it. And
Mhm.
that's just not realistic. And a lot of times that I think that tendency can drive us to hyper focus on details that maybe they matter, but they're not the you lose the forest for the trees situation. And I think too, when we zoom out on the fire ground, if you have a battalion chief and he's running that fire, he's going to know everybody's job, but he's not going to, because you're responsible for so much, you don't have the luxury of being deeply immersed in truck operations, deeply immersed in engine company operations, deeply immersed in the EMS side of it. You have to just know enough about each domain, all the work that's being done, but still be able to operate at a 30,000-foot view and make those strategic decisions. So it's something that firefighters understand intrinsically, but that move to administration, it reframes it. And I think that it's difficult for firefighters to see that when they first get up there.
It's so true. And I was thinking about one of the books they make us, it's required reading in the executive fire officer program, is Leadership on the Line,
Mm.
uh, by Linsky, Heifetz and Linsky, I think it is. And they talk about the balcony versus dance floor concept. And so as a leader, you have to step off, get off that dance floor every once in a while where all the chaos is. And you're in the trees, you're in the forest, and you have to go up on the balcony and look down to get a different perspective. However, you can't stay up on that balcony all the time. You have to know when to come down, back down into that dance floor and move with the people and hear the things. And so I think that it is kind of goes along with being that generalist. It doesn't mean that you're not engaged in each one of the processes. It's that you're just taking a different view, a different perspective.
Yeah. One lesson I learned the hard way, both times I went from operations to administration, was when you first get up to administration, there's going to be a period of 2, 3, 4 months maybe where the work doesn't start immediately pouring in. And ideally, this is the time to get acclimated, learn how to use the systems that you're expected to use, whether that's Excel, and it'll be different for each job, but learn how to, if you're the planning captain, learn how to run the reports, learn the data, learn the systems, learn the people. Hey, if I need to go to talk to HR, who's the person? If I need to talk to risk, who's the person? But the temptation when you get in there is you're like, man, there's just not that much going on right now. I better fill this plate up because I feel like I'm not contributing. And that's what I did both times. I got up there, I gave it about a day. And then I thought to myself, man, there's just nothing going on. This is too easy. I better start adding things to this plate so that I can feel that I'm contributing. And then, you pile on a bunch of stuff. And then the next thing you know, 3 or 4 months passes. And then all of a sudden, all the stuff starts coming in. And then you're totally inundated. And, if I could go back, I would tell myself, relax, the work will come. Don't worry. It'll find you. Take this time, learn the systems, meet the people, take a breath, get your system set up, build the habits. I wonder if that's been an experience that you've had.
Oh man, so true. And something I hadn't thought about for a while. When I first got up there, and it may have been because people were giving me time to acclimate and just taking care of me a little bit. But I'm sitting up there some days, by myself in my office, eating my lunch by myself, and thinking to myself, gosh, I know there's something that I should be doing right now. I'm supposed to be doing something. I'm surely I'm screwing up somewhere, right? And it was so true. Within a couple of months, it just starts naturally coming in. I think people start to give you more. They've seen that you're a little bit acclimated, and you start to recognize what those things are that you need to be working on. So you do have to kind of show yourself some grace in the beginning and focus on those systems, processes, and the relationship building. I'm going to continue to come back to that relationship building piece. That's the time to be doing that. But it felt really, really awkward in the beginning. It was almost like I would have rather someone, we're firefighters, so we like policies, and we don't always like them, but we like direction, right?
Mm-hmm.
We thrive on direction. And So you're kind of looking for that playbook, the manual on how to
Mhm.
do the job, and it's just not there. It's just not there for those positions. But yes, the work will come. Just give it some time.
Yeah, take a breath. If you're in that, if this is resonating with you, take a breath, build the systems out. The
Yeah,
work will find you. I can assure, regardless of what department you're at, I can assure you the
sure.
work is coming. Well, that's a that's a good segue. I wanted to, because you've had such a I think you've had such a wealth of knowledge that you've accumulated about that transition to administration. I want to crystallize some of those lessons that we can pass on to the audience. And I'm hoping that this is something that people will share around to that person that just got moved into administration or just got promoted. And so if you're talking directly to that person right now, let's pass on a couple of those nuggets of wisdom. The first one that, and I'll get it started here, but the first one that I really liked that I was listening to, or that I rather heard rather in the fire rescue article, was staying connected to the membership. What do you make of that? And why is that important for someone moving to administration?
Well, it was definitely important to me, especially on the operations side. I told people I wanted to keep operations and operations.
Mhm.
Sometimes I feel like we get we get so ahead of ourselves. We get so strategic sometimes that we forget about the people that are doing the work. Our
Mhm.
community doesn't care about those of us up in the office
Right.
pushing papers around. They care who shows up timely to their emergency. And so staying connected was important to me, and important in a selfish way too. I'll be honest. Like I said, I really missed the firehouse, and I missed that camaraderie and the things that just happened naturally. And so staying connected is very important to me. And so I, of course, like we all do, we have these aspirations that we're going to visit the firehouse every day. I was doing ride-alongs, and I still do ride-alongs. I try to as much as possible, but I do these Thursday night ride-alongs and eat dinner with the crew and kind of an extended stay just to really know what's going on out there, because we start to make things up sometimes, I think, in our positions, or we make assumptions, and they're well-intentioned assumptions, but we have to get back out there and we have to hear it from the members and how things are hitting with them, because then down the road, when we do have that big project or that initiative and maybe people don't agree with it all, it's going to help. We're going to have that trust built that we can sell it and make it successful. And so staying connected has been a very important piece for me. And I'm not very, I haven't been as good at it as I would like to,
Yeah,
but I'm
same.
putting a lot of effort in. And really, a lot of the reason I'm doing the things that I am now and that I'm talking about these things and trying to share some of that even through the podcast and that sort of
Mhm.
thing, is to
Yeah.
maintain that connection.
Yeah, firefighters really want to know the why, and being out there interacting with everybody in operations is it gives I think it gives people a chance to ask the questions. Why are we doing this thing? Why is this a priority? We have so many other things we could be doing right now. Why are we doing this? And I've seen just a little bit of information goes such a long way. Firefighters just want to be kept in the loop. And I think too, the big part of that is when we don't provide good, transparent information to our workforce, they're going to fill in the blanks. And so you
Sure.
either put accurate information out there or the narrative will write itself. And that's not helpful, especially when things don't go well. If you have a rollout, a technology rollout or something, and it didn't go the way you wanted it to go, you want to explain, listen, I know that didn't go well, and here's why. And if you don't, in the absence of that, firefighters will come up with their own story.
100%. And, you know, I just, I don't want to be that chief that walks in the room and everything goes silent.
Yeah.
When I walk in
The
and the
recliners pop
converse,
closed all of a
yeah,
sudden.
right. When the conversation stays, kind of salty, and they do voice their rants and their concerns, even if they're frivolous, like I know that we're doing the right thing, and I want to hear from them, and it's so true. They're the ones that are gonna to make or break this thing, especially our company officers. I write and teach a lot on the influence that our first line company officers have. And so staying connected to them especially is very, very important. And sometimes it's just them feeling like they can trust the work that's being done. on their behalf. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, it's just always been important to me. You're right. Just they will make up their own story if you don't provide that narrative. And it's I just think it's so important to maintain those open lines of communication and give them a chance to push back. And you know what? In the end, anytime we humanize something, it is so hard. You know,
Yeah.
it's so hard to not get on board versus, especially, you think about during COVID times and how difficult that was with all the distanced communication and, virtual communication. I go in person and I deliver a message, it's going to be received completely different than an email. We know that. And so anytime we can humanize it, I think it kind of allows people to let their guards down and be honest.
Yeah. And it will definitely help you stay sane if you're going to administration and you're in a situation like you were in, or like I was in, and you really miss that camaraderie. Going back out there will help you stay sane, help you stay connected, and help you keep your identity as a firefighter, because it can be hard to feel like a firefighter when you are not fighting fires, you're not riding on a fire truck. So getting back out there, touching grass, checking in with the guys and the girls out there really will help you keep your sanity.
I was at the grocery store a couple of weeks ago with my wife, and kid is really energetic bagging our groceries, and he's asking what we do for a living. And I said, oh, I work for the fire department. And he gets all excited. And then he says, well, what do you do at the fire department? I go, well, I'm a chief and I work in the office now. And he just looks out, his excitement stops and he just says, so you're a desk firefighter now? And then like street cred just went out the window. So it's
Yeah.
just, it is, you can't beat it. You can't beat being out there and running some calls and being with the people doing the good work.
I was at the bus stop dropping or with my daughter, and they were talking about the career day, and my daughter yells out, "My dad used to be a firefighter." Oh, right in the heart. Well, Cecilia, I still am, but
Oh, totally.
convincing a 7-year-old. All right, well, let's give a couple more nuggets here. Anything else that you'd
Yeah.
want to say to somebody that's moving into that administrative role?
I think I think there's just a lot of fear of it, and that identity piece is a big deal to people. But we need good people to move into these roles, and there are great challenges. Sometimes we lament about the downsides of it, but it really is cool to have this level of influence and responsibility. And I just we've joked at our admin that we're rebranding it. We've always called it admin, but we're going to call it the HQ. We're calling it headquarters now, and
Much
we're
cooler.
going to make the HQ cool again. And so there are great challenges that can be had, and you can do a lot of good work. And we really do need good people to move into these positions.
For sure.
And I think, like we talked about, just to kind of wrap it up, you can be successful in these jobs. You have to get a little bit uncomfortable in the beginning and be okay not knowing everything, and build your team and know your strengths and weaknesses, and know that this is a long game as well. And that's the difference between being in that 911 emergency environment and being in that more strategic role, is you don't have to solve everything in one day, and you don't have to be the fixer every day either. Sometimes people will come to you and just want somebody to listen, and sometimes and you have to know when that is, and listen. And just it's all a big exercise in discernment and trying to hear that signal in the noise, and staying engaged enough so that you do, but not taking it personal, because we are human, and just allow the normal human things to work, and you can do some really good things.
Yeah. Well, amen to that. I want to switch now. I want to pivot a little bit and focus a bit more on project management specifically.
Yeah.
And you and I had a great conversation about this the other day before the podcast. And so my thesis is that if you take a fire department and you have the 911 calls, of course, but what you have, if you take the 911 calls out, what you have left is projects, programs, and processes. And every program has to start as a project, and every process has to start as a project. And so it's a very big part of what we do. And I've been a part of enough projects now, before and after my interest in project management kind of peaked. And it's It's really hard to run a project in the fire service. It's not, and I'm sure it's hard everywhere, but there are so many factors that you have militating against you when you're running a project in the fire service, whether it's the shift schedule that we work, the vast number of stakeholders we have that can be involved in different projects, and on and on. So I was wondering if you could share some of the experiences you've had, if you have any that kind of stand out to you, projects that went really poorly or really well, or just insights that you've taken away from those.
Yeah, for sure. And you're right. You write all this stuff down on paper, you plan your project, and it seems so straightforward, right? But when you then put it in the fire service realm with all of the moving parts, it is extremely challenging when you're dealing with even the admin staff. A lot of them are in different locations, they're coming and going and that sort of thing. And then when you think about like, I work for a municipality, and so we always call it going across the street and talking to the right people. We don't have all the positions. We don't have HR, IT, city manager's office, our city attorney. All of that is separate from us. However, we work within that system, and so there are a lot of schedules you have to align, a lot of relationships you have to build, that sort of thing. I think I was pretty naive to it coming in. Like I'd said, I'd worked on many projects before, but not. I hadn't necessarily been in charge of these projects, and I came in. There was one that was a real hard lesson, I think. And I came into a radio system upgrade where we were just moving our system to another radio system, so new towers, new antennas, that sort of thing. So software and hardware upgrades. Well, we work in a municipality. Our communication center is run by our police department, but they provide our services as well. So we're kind of a customer of theirs, but we are still family because we all work in for the same city. I was told this project was pretty straightforward. It's going to take a couple of days when we do the cutover. We weren't involved in any of the build up or anything like that. So we're going to cut over. We're going to move to a backup channel. Everything's going to be fine. Well, what wasn't understood by the people that were planning the project was that we run in a 7-department auto aid region, and so we're just a small 6-station department, and we operate really well with our own, just our own resources. But then we operate as part of a 35-station bigger region, and we all have different dispatch centers, however, and different CADs, but they're all tied together with AVL. So what was discovered kind of in the 11th hour was that not all the departments had our backup channel available. And so it was a scramble. Then I had to force all these other fire departments to reprogram and add channels. And so caused a lot of hard feelings. And it were among the relationships I was trying to build with my area, fire department partners, but also the relationships I was trying to build with our own police department and communication center. It was really nobody's fault. It was just that we didn't come to the table early on and discuss it. And like I said, I came into the game pretty late. And so that wasn't their fault. And it wasn't necessarily my fault either. I think we just missed a connection point there. And so the point there was just that had we brought all the stakeholders, determine those stakeholders ahead of time, bring them to the table and just anticipate all the problems that we could have, kind of start with the end in mind and walk us through how we operate. We could have anticipated all of these challenges we were going to have. We could have gotten all the programming done ahead of time, a lot less hard feelings. There were passions flaring on Zoom calls. We were going to kill firefighters and, this is the end of the world and that sort of thing. And so it just got a little bit out of control. We pulled it all together, and it was the relationships that we did have already established that I think allowed us to do that. And so we delayed the project just a short amount of time. We were able to kick it off without any problems. But it was just an example of, kind of anticipating who those stakeholders are and bringing them to the table early on. And we've talked a little bit, you and I, about how you can definitely have too many people at the table, and you don't want a death by committee. But I think early on in the process, you do have to make sure you're not missing anything. And then I had a project we're still working on right now. If you're familiar with Tablet Command, the incident command software, we've been using it for a couple of years in our region and just love it. And so we're moving to their two-way technology, which allows us to replace our MDCs with iPads, and we're going to use their platform for all of our mapping and that sort of thing. They've been very, very supportive from a vendor standpoint, as far as customer support and that sort of thing. But sometimes I think we may have relied too much on the vendor to tell us what their product can do. And it's, we're listening to the vendor and they're saying, yeah, it's not a problem. We can do this, this, and this. We've done it in all these different areas. Well, I think on the fire department side, it's been an overall successful project, but we may have failed to bring some of the other stakeholders in early to do just the same thing I was talking about with that radio system project, just anticipate some of the challenges. And so again, some of the challenges were on our communication center in the CAD system we were running. We were in need of upgrades, to the CAD system, which if you've ever dealt with CAD systems, you know that they can be a challenge sometimes to deal with, especially their customer service, right? And so we were at their mercy to get their upgrades done so that our software would talk. Mm-hmm. And so it was kind of bringing those things together. Had we maybe predetermined some of those challenges, and maybe some of them weren't going to be, maybe some of them we did just have to work through the process a little bit. But again, I come back to bringing the right people to the table early on and working through that. And we've got just a superstar battalion chief that's taken the lead on that project, and he's going to make sure it's successful. And I guess it's kind of a tangent to go on here, but I think having those rock stars in each area is extremely important, important as well. So many of those challenges I think could have been anticipated, and we just didn't know how to anticipate them because we didn't have the expertise in all those areas. So that was another one that I think we are going to be successful with, but maybe we could have just saved ourselves a little bit of time and heartache. Now, on the other hand, we are just wrapping up a very successful project, and that was the purchase of LifePak 35 heart monitors. And that was a big project, multi-year process, of course. We're replacing every monitor in the department with these, $50,000 to $60,000 pieces of equipment. And so you want to make sure you get it right. There's a big budgeting component, a procurement component to that. And then we have to determine what the training plan is going to be in implementation, that sort of thing. Of course, we had to test a lot of, we had to beta test all the different monitors and have all the different vendors come in so that we could do the RFPs and all that sort of thing. So there's a lot of work up front. We actually learned from a past experience. The last time we implemented new monitors, we had a committee that was put together, and the committee actually recommended a certain brand of monitor that was going to be different from what we were currently using. And then the fire department ended up purchasing the same manufacturer that we had been. And there were reasons for it. But I think going back to that communication piece, we kind of failed to tell our story and communicate that back. It was more of a, hey, this is just what has to happen, based on our current circumstances. And so there were a lot of upset people. So we learned from past experience there. I think that's another important lesson when it comes to project management. Make sure that there is no history involved. It doesn't mean that you're not going to deviate from that because maybe we know more now, but make sure there's not history or certain sensitivities involved. And then the successful part about this program, I think, was that we saw it as an opportunity that we were already putting all this work in, that we're going to maximize this piece of technology. I think so often we just want to get it in place, and we'll do like 80 or 90%, and then we say we'll finish the rest later, and we don't. And so there are so many functions and features that maybe we'll bypass just to say, hey, let's get it in place and then we'll deal with the rest later. And I think we did a really good job on this one of taking our time and saying, let's maximize this product. And so we were able to integrate it. Then we used the Lucas CPR device as well, and really got into the science and studied efficient, pit stop type CPR, hammered CPR training along with the implementation of our monitor and integrating the Lucas device. And in the end, we put these machines in place now that can talk to, our report writing system, can talk to our hospitals, that sort of thing. We're getting great data out of them. And in that, we're able to tell the story now that our rate of ROSC has gone from somewhere around 10% to over 30% since the implementation of this. And I think it was really due to solid project implementation. Instead of just putting the piece of equipment in place, we really focused on it. And I think people are probably tired of going to these trainings and stuff, but it's not a one and done. Like we've kept talking about it, and now we're going to close the loop on it. So we're going to come back to our membership and we're going to say, all that work you did, this is the payoff. This is the why. This is why we do this stuff. And I think it's just been a very, very successful project.
Wow. That's a lot. I mean, you said a lot of great stuff there. First of all, congratulations on that ROSC rate. What a huge deal that is. I mean, that is a huge, huge deal, 10% to 30%. And I think people really resonate with that victory. You take that out to the troops. That's a huge win, because it shows, hey, listen, you guys worked really hard on this. You invested a lot of your time. I know you have a million, when I talked about this, there's a million things going on in the firehouse on a day-to-day basis. And you're saying, I know that you took time out of your day and committed and invested it to this. This is the net result of that. Direct impact on lives being saved. But another thing that you said that just, man, nail on the head. This is something that I had to learn the hard way. One of the hardest things about a project is when you don't start at the beginning of the project, when you get brought in the middle. This has happened. I don't know. I need to think more about why this happens so much in the fire service. I'm gonna think on this. I have some top of mind, or right off the top of my mind, guesses. I think we rotate a lot of people through administration a lot, but in any case, I'll think more about that. But coming into a project in the middle is so hard, because very rarely are you going to get that full turnover report, if we can borrow some fire department terminology. And so you come in the middle, assumptions have been made, decisions have been made. Sometimes you identify all the stakeholders, sometimes it wasn't done. So it's a very difficult thing to come in midstream on a project and try to figure out what's been done, what hasn't been done, and then, not miss anything. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. That is such a valuable thing to talk about here.
Yeah, it is a big challenge. And it kind of happened during that time, we were talking about earlier, where I'm sitting in that office wondering why I don't have more work to do, or I'm missing something here. And so then I instantly, started, had a lot of guilt with that project specifically, wondering what I could have done better, or anticipated some of those challenges. So it was very much on me. I'm not pointing fingers at anyone else. It was,
right.
It was all of us just missed it. But yeah, it's tough to come in the middle. On the other side of this, actually myself and my EMS chief turned over close to the same time, and we came in the middle of this LifePack 35 implementation, and I think it had such a good start, and we still had so many key players that were in place that it actually continued. But it was tough. We had to learn really, really quick, and I can't take credit for that one. That one was all our EMS section. They did a fantastic job, and I give credit to the EMS chief that was in the position to start the project, but then really a lot of credit to my new EMS chief, who did have to come in midstream, get his bearings and figure things out, and then took it to the next level with seeing that this was more, if we're going to have this kind of investment, we can do more than just implement a piece of equipment here. Let's look at habits as well and focus on those habits.
You mentioned two things about that monitor project, which interestingly enough, we're actually conducting the exact same project right now. Yeah, it's a complicated one. But you mentioned two things that I really liked. The first was lessons learned. One of the big things that I've tried to implement in our department is writing a project closeout report when you're done with something. And
Mm.
it's typically the first thing to get discarded when when you're talking about getting a project to that 80 or 90%, because it's,
Mhm.
the project's done and it's like, hey, why write this report? It's already done. Who cares? We already know all the things. But capturing those lessons learned on projects is so critical, because we run the same project over and over and over again in the fire service. There'll be slight differences, but if you've rolled out a piece of equipment, it's a very similar project to rolling out the next piece of equipment. You're going to have to identify stakeholders. You're going to have to communicate. You're going to have to train. You're going to have to do some risk forecasting. And so, because we run the same project over and over again with slight modifications, getting that lessons learned can save so much heartache for the next project team that's going to run a similar project. And then that kind of ties in with the other thing that you brought up that I really liked, was the concept of technical debt, where you get that project to 90% done and then it's good enough, send it. And that 10% is typically the policies that didn't get updated, the project closeout report that didn't get written. Maybe it's some training element, maybe it's the communication. But if you do that enough times, project after project after project after project, you get it to 90%, but you don't close it out. 10%, that 10% stacks up on top of each other. And what happens, I've found, is that it will slow down other ongoing projects, because you have lingering things to do from the projects that you didn't fully close out.
So true. Not to mention just the sheer weight riding on your shoulders when you go from one to the next to the next. You know you didn't close that last thing out, and you're not even able to move on with the clarity you need to the next project. And so I'm working on a staffing project right now. It's interesting because it was one that I kind of taken the lead on as a battalion chief, because I used in our department, we have a dedicated captain positions. They're online captains, but they are our staffing officers. And so I was one of those staffing captains when I was a captain, and then I moved to battalion chief. So staffing's always been, something that I've been invested in. And so we were doing an upgrade to, we use Telestaff, and we were doing a Telestaff upgrade. And it's like, again, it's kind of like the Life Pack system, where we're like, let's make the most of this. If we're going to do an upgrade, let's do more than just technical fixes. Let's look at the things that we've been talking about from a systems and policy standpoint for years that we'd like to deal with. And so started working on that. And I realized really quick that, oh man, our policies are so outdated. And there was a minute there where I wanted to just, let's get the stuff in place. We were working with a consultant that was helping us build out and code that Telestaff to our liking. And I was working with all of our staffing officers and our battalion chiefs to figure out what our systems were going to be. And we were changing our mandatory overtime process, because that's a fun one right now,
Yeah.
all that sort of thing. And really tempted to just push the updating of the policies off to the side. And I'm so thankful that I put myself and another one of our captains on the process of rewriting the SOG as we went. Mm-hmm. And so we're just adjusting it as we go. And I think the future me is really going to be happy with past me for doing that, so that my goal then is to set this thing before the first of the year, and then be able to move on and really make a clean break from it. And then all we're doing is, the after action on it. We're watching it for the next year. Then we're taking notes. We're seeing what we need to adjust in the future. But you're right. We just let that stuff build up, and it's so hard, especially in a department the size that we are. We're a small department, so we rely on people wearing a lot of hats, and so it's just natural that you're going to move to the next and to the next thing. And so I couldn't agree more. Just that debt it just keeps building up, and you never get out from under it. You never do. So I appreciate you saying that. I've always known it intrinsically, but I didn't have the fancy words that you project management people have. And so,
anytime you
very well said.
Before anything, it makes it sound really fancy.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a perfect transition to something that I wanted to talk to you about the other day, but we didn't get around to it. But in our communication before this podcast, we briefly talked about, and that is AI in the fire service. And I think this is such a good transition from what we were talking about, because we spoke about how, you're always going to be understaffed in administration, or it seems like that's always the case. And you're just, you're looking for those force multipliers. And AI, I feel pretty confident that AI is that force multiplier, but I know you're using it for a lot of different things. And so I wanted to pick your brain on some of the use cases, some of the things that you're doing in your department, and where you see I guess, the broader concept of integrating artificial intelligence into fire service operations.
Yeah, I I'm really engaged in this and just trying. I'm a baby, with it. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm equal parts excited and equal parts terrified, I think, by it. But I think there's definitely a place in the fire service, and especially the things that we've talked about. If we can make some of these processes simpler so that we can focus our our bandwidth on the pieces that are important. There, especially in the fire service, we're never going to get to a point where everything's automated. You're always going to have the human involved in it. So I think it's the human that still has to determine how they're going to leverage the technology that's out there. You have to know the right prompts to put in. You have to know what to trust and what not to trust. And then it really only gets you to a certain point. So, I mean, I'm really only looking for AI to get me, a certain percentage. But if it can get me there faster and then allow me that 20% time to really focus, then I think it's a huge force multiplier. Now, full disclaimer, our city is still working through policies and that sort of thing with what we allow AI wise and that sort of thing. So most of this work I'm doing on my own personal devices, off to the side, not utilizing the city system unless we're getting approval for that. But I've just found that certain things, like I'll give you an example. We were asked to present to city council, our command team, on the wildfire threat. And as you know, we've got, significant wildfire problem here in our area. We had a big fire, the Marshall fire, a couple of years ago that ripped through really close to home. It wasn't in the mountains. It was, down on the lowlands. And we had evacuations in our own city during that time, that sort of thing. So our city council just wanted to know what we've learned from that event, along with the California fires that have happened recently, and then what we're doing for it. So an example of how I used AI for this was in building that presentation. I went to Perplexity, which is one of my favorites for doing research, because they always cite their sources. And so
Yeah.
I am not trusting everything that's coming up. I'm going to those sources that they're citing, the articles, the AARs, that sort of thing. But it gave me a quick jumping off point. So we're still building the material. We're still prompting it with the questions we're looking to answer. So it's still a very human element behind it. But if I would have gone and done Google searches for each one of the things that I was looking for, that AI's got the ability to take a complicated multi-part question and put it all together. So like I'm able to pull all those AARs and ask Perplexity at the time, tell me about the three common, factors that were found in, it's difficulty with evacuation, difficulty with notifications, whatever. And it was able to pull that information to me a lot faster. And so then I was able to take that with our command team. We were able to look at that and determine where we wanted to focus. And so we built the presentation. It wasn't like I was allowing AI to do it start to finish, but it gave me a great jumping off point. And then we were able to use that information then to move forward with our plan and to really articulate what our plan is to keep our community safe. And so that's just one example and one platform that we were able to use for that. I use it all the time for just building documents. If it's just like one of those documents that maybe I'm just going to read. For instance, I am responsible for building our promotional processes, our internal promotional processes. And we didn't have good documentation for it. It was one of these things that was just kind of passed down from year to year. We reinvent the wheel every single year. We had consistency, but we didn't have it in writing. And so I was able to take all the things that we were doing very simply, just type it out without having to overthink my grammar and my structure and all that kind of stuff, throw it into AI and allow it to feed me out a nice looking document that I could pass on from year to year to year and save me time down the road, and then pass it on to someone down the road that takes over for me. That was one of those things. It was all my work, but I was just using AI to help me structure the information that I wanted to put in. So I used ChatGPT, of course, a lot. We use ChatGPT for a lot, but I really enjoy Claude as well. I use both of those for that. ChatGPT I find super useful for just like an everyday, almost to replace Google, with my everyday quick searches. But I really use Claude for the back and forth conversations that I'm having.
Yeah.
And I think I mentioned it to you earlier, like when I was building that podcast, I know nothing about podcast. I just had this kind of harebrained idea that man, how can I stay connected with my crews without physically being there all the time? And so I wanted to give them information that would be beneficial to them, but also at the same time, profile and highlight these people, for the good work that they're doing, because I'm really proud of our department and the work that we're doing. And so I had no idea where to even start with that. I just started having a conversation, and I'm telling you all my deepest, darkest secrets now that you're going to think that AI is my only friend, but having this back and forth conversation with Claude, and Claude I find it to be a lot more user friendly, a lot more personable, and it told me exactly what platforms to look for, how to make it work, logistically, but then also, you should do this first and then you should do this next. And, and again, you can't trust everything and you have to make it fit, but just very, very useful in that way.
Yeah, man, I just love everything that you said. There's a great podcast that I listen to called IdeaCast, and it's by the Harvard Business Review. Maybe you're familiar with it. They did an episode, I guess it would have been in 2023, where they talked about how most innovation comes from the top down. So, you get an organization and it'll get something that it wants to deploy or roll out, and it'll push it from the top down. But what's so interesting about the AI revolution is that it's coming from the bottom up, meaning that people discover AI and they discover what it can do for them in their specific situation, whether it's at home or their job, and they're using it to get their time back. They're saying, well, this thing would have taken me 3 hours. Now it's going to take me 20 minutes. And so now I have 2.5 hours of my time back. And so there's this incentive structure that's been created where people from the ground up are innovating in their specific positions, and that it's essentially incumbent upon leadership to set guardrails, what you can and can't use it for, clear parameters, and then also provide training so people know how to get the most leverage and know kind of the things you were talking about. When do you trust it? When are you suspicious? So it's so interesting to hear you say that, because that's a very similar journey that I've had with AI, where I kind of got that wow factor in 2020, late 2022. And your job better than other people. And so you're going to know these are the situations where I've been able to use AI to be a force multiplier. So yeah, very interesting. The use cases for AI are really limited by your imagination, I think. And that's where that training is a huge piece of it. Can you speak to that a little bit? Is this something that you guys are looking at doing, training more on this, rolling this out?
I don't know. I mean, we're not quite there fire department wise, but I was in a meeting the other day with some city people, and I know our IT department is working on training right now for AI. I think so many, I feel really bad for them. I mean, our IT has got so much on their plate already, and they're grossly understaffed, just like most of us are, right?
That's a similar story over here.
Man. And then this is thrown on their lap. Like, go figure out this thing that none of us really know about, and then build policy to protect the city. And we know that there's value in it, but there have to be guardrails as well. And so I know they did say that there are going to be some trainings coming out soon. They're writing policy as we speak. So I would love to incorporate more in, and even into, officer development and that sort of thing. It's not teaching people how to cheat. It's teaching people how to use their resources. And then it allows us then to focus that bandwidth in a different place. And it allows us to do more deep work, thinking work, I think, in those areas that we need to. So, you take that project to, 80% completion, and then it allows us to not focus on the minutia, but to to actually do the things that we need to, that only humans can do. So
well said. So well said. It is about getting the human to focus on the things that only the human can do. That's not the document generation or any of
yeah.
that stuff. And I don't know a lot of firefighters that like to sit down and write lengthy documents and type. We're not a lot of there's not a lot of English majors, and so if you can get a piece of technology to do that for you, that gives you back 2 or 3 hours that you can spend, and that's from that strategic level thinking about where the project needs to go or whatever. So very, very well said.
That is so true. And the last one I'll talk about, and I think that I don't see a lot of people using yet, but I think is going to be one very beneficial to us in the fire service, and that's Notebook LM. Have you used Notebook
I have
LM
not.
at
No.
all? Google. So it allows us to work internally. It's only going to work off of the documents that you're feeding into it. So for instance, and it's part of the Google Suite. Everybody, I think, has it. So I went to this is one area of this deputy chief position I'm maybe not totally looking forward to, but I'll be part of our labor negotiations, but on the other side, on the command side. We've got a great thing going, so I'm very, very fortunate to be in the situation I am. But I had gone to a labor management conference and going to all these classes, and this wasn't your typical, firefighter conference where it was all about the networking. This was actual education, and so I was able to take every PowerPoint. They provided all the PowerPoints on all the handout materials and put it into Notebook LM, and I created just basically a project with all of that, and then I can go in and ask questions of it. So if I'm wondering about a certain law, employment law, or that sort of thing, I can type in, a search, and it'll pull up every time it was talked about during that conference. Another thing, going into negotiations, I'll be able to put our collective bargaining agreement, our city policy procedures and rules, any other important key documents in there. And then those times where we're like, gosh, I wonder if that jives with, city policy, or I wonder if that, if the CBA and city policy align on that, you can ask LM those questions directly, and you've just saved yourself many, many minutes of research during that time, especially when you're, maybe in that meeting where you're in a crunch for time and people are asking a certain question. You're just saving yourself time. It's not cheating. You're just being efficient on it. So Notebook LM's cool. You can also plug like policies and that sort of thing in. I did a recent podcast episode on lithium ion batteries and that sort of thing. And so we had several new policies along with, I was trying to take some of the science that's out there through NIST and that sort of thing. And so able to put all of these different documents into Notebook LM, and then you can tell it to create a podcast for you. So it'll create its own podcast. And these people sound so human. You can tell it to give me a 10-minute podcast on electric vehicle, fires, and it will, and you can prompt it the things you want it to hit on, and it'll give you a podcast so that you're listening. Maybe you got to commute like I do. You're on your way to work, and you're just trying to get, kind of bone up on some stuff. You can. So I think Notebook LM is one. I feel like it's got to be a little bit safer too, because you're working within your own documents, and so you're not relying on the internet to give you all the answers. But just a couple examples.
Yeah, that's great. We use Copilot. We use which is part of the Microsoft Office suites,
sure.
But very, very similar to what you're describing with LM. And I just want to throw this out there for the audience here. So first of all, I did a podcast on ChatGPT for firefighters. So check it out if you're interested. But the other thing I wanted to throw out there was I found this. So I'm a big fan of Coursera. I'm not sure if you've used it. It's an online learning platform. Sounds like you have. They have, if you're a Coursera premium member, it's like $40 a month, but it really is worth it because you can get access to all these different, legit training offerings. And so the one that I was going to recommend was there's a generative AI strategy and leadership one that's hosted by Vanderbilt University. And functionally, it's $50 a month if you have the premium Coursera membership. And that's just like a 3 or 4 month program. And from start to finish, it is everything you need to know, top to bottom. And I highly recommend it. I did it last year, or maybe the year before that, and really enjoyed it. So the point I wanted to make is that there's a lot of really good either free or near free subject matter or subject material out there if you're looking to bone up on AI or figure out how best to use it. And then, of course, my podcast is 25 minutes. So if you're looking for something a little quicker. But all right, so Chief, the last thing I wanted to talk about, because I do want to be respectful of your time. You've been very gracious to come on here and give me as much time as you have. Can we talk a little bit about your podcast and some of the things you cover and where people can find you and, that sort of thing?
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate you mentioning that. It's interesting. The podcast, I think we talked about it a little bit. I was looking for a way to connect with our membership, and I originally had thought, I'll start a monthly newsletter. I like to write. I'll do some operations focused stuff in there. I'll get other people to contribute, and then I realized that that even though I may like to receive information that way, it's not the way that everybody likes to get their information. And so I had this harebrained idea to start a podcast. It was just going to be an internal podcast, give some training opportunities for people, kind of highlight the good things people were doing. And then I realized, why not open it up to the greater fire service as well? And then also our community, I want our community to know what we're doing and meet some of our firefighters. And so it just kind of grew out of that I was trying to give us a nice little training platform, but then just said, hey, we don't have anything to hide. In fact, I'm very proud of our organization. We're far from perfect, but we've got some things to share. And then hopefully along the way, we learn some things as I bring on a few outside guests as well. And so kind of got started with it. Like I said, started doing some brainstorming on how we could make this thing work. And we just launched just now a couple of weeks ago. And so really hoping to do, I'm going to at least monthly episodes, but right now I've got a couple piled up. So I think I'm going to go bi-weekly as long as I can, and really hitting on those things that are important to our operations members. And so whether that be direct tactics and training or, leadership, I want to focus a lot on leadership development, focusing on officer development with, taking some of our promoted positions in the fire department and going beyond the job description, and really interviewing the people that are doing the job and that have been successful doing the job. Same thing with our special teams positions and that sort of thing. I feel like we've had kind of a waning off of, maybe people wanting to get involved in some of those extra things, at least in our department. Mm-hmm. And I just want to show them how important those extra duties can be, because you just such growth areas for people. And we've got just superstars doing so much good work out there. So that's kind of what I'm doing with that. I'm kind of leaving it open-ended to just kind of grow however it will. Mm-hmm. And, if it brings value to 10 people in my organization and maybe a couple outside, then I feel like it's totally worth it. And so that's kind of where I'm going with that. You can contact me. It's called Ops Talk. You could do a search for WFD Ops Talk podcast in any of the major platforms. I'm doing it on video. So you'll have a YouTube version, but then you can get it on any of the audio platforms as well. And that was a lot of the reason I wanted to do it. I know people like to receive their information different ways. And that's why I really appreciate the work that you're doing here. Your podcast came for me at a time I was just kind of searching around and having these conversations with myself and some of my staffers that, we just don't get the training that we need in some of these areas, especially project management. Mm-hmm. And then bam, next thing I know, I came across your podcast and it's been super beneficial. And so I like to offer it up, like I'm sure you have too. And the idea that you had with it was to give it to people when they're ready to receive it and allow them to take it with them, whether they're on their commute or they're, working out or if they if they want to sit down at a computer or their phone and watch the YouTube version, they can. So mm-hmm. I'll have some visuals as well on mine, share a little bit more on the video version, but yeah, we'll see how it goes and just let it evolve naturally.
Well, to kind of go back to the book we mentioned earlier, Range, one of the reasons that I really like what you're doing with Ops Talk is you never know what idea you're going to hear that's going to really hit you. And maybe it's not exactly the problem or the issue that you're thinking about or working on, but you hear something and it's in a similar field and it, chops an idea in your head and you think, oh man, that's a great solution for that. So I really like hearing from the perspective of other departments, the things that they're working on, the things that they're focusing on, their concerns, their issues. And I think people have gotten a chance to get to know you here a little bit, and they can see that you're a very authentic guy. You say what's on your mind. And I think people really appreciate that. I know I really appreciated it. So highly recommend for anyone out there that's looking for a good, no nonsense discussion of what's going on in the fire service from the perspective of a similar, something similar to what you've got going on, but it's, couched from the perspective of another department. Highly recommend checking it out. And I just want to close out by saying that I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. This has been a great conversation, and I really enjoyed talking to you last week, and I've really enjoyed our conversation here. So Eric Linnenburger, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Peter, and keep up the great work. Great work on that podcast.
Thank you, sir.